And if they don't have, they don't have the capacity to really, chop, process, cook sweet potatoes, then this wouldn't be a good fit. So really understanding a school's or a district's capacity helps determine what types of products would be a good fit. The final slide in this section includes tips for producers that are just getting started in school sales, or that their produce might not fit into a formal solicitation process. So they might have some products that maybe a school, is not part of their normal menu, but maybe you're wanting to introduce some product, or you would really like a school to, purchase some small amounts. And so there's a little bit of information about that. So in the next slide, it includes an excerpt from a full video case study where Ali Marachek, who's the child nutrition director at the Fayetteville, Arkansas Public Schools, she provides some tips to producers on approaching and working with a child nutrition director. And so I'm gonna share this clip with you all. Once again, in this presentation, this is like about a 1-minute clip. The fuller video case study and a written case study that goes with it is available in the case study resources. So I'm gonna stop my share so I can share the video.
Yeah, well, I would say number one, bring samples. You will have, a lot more luck with the child nutrition director when you bring them something tasty to eat, and also so you can showcase how different the flavor might be, or bring some different varieties that maybe they've never seen before. They're used to seeing that from their broker, so to kind of align with that would be great. Also, come to the conversation knowing what you need for your farm operation. Just so that they can plan accordingly, and you can decide together whether it's a good market for your operation. Mm-hmm. So probably the quickest and most simple explanation for how we manage purchasing relationships with growers is through a bid process, and the type of bidding you do depends on how much you're likely going to buy from the grower. But we have early conversations, and we are allowed to share previous pricing or current pricing with the grower, so they can see if that pricing is something similar might work for their business, and then they can decide whether they participate in our bidding solicitation, all of that we're required to do. So you can have initial conversations about price before that happens. You can't tell them the price to put down, but it's just, it's open information that anyone could request. And we primarily purchase directly from growers. We have a district warehouse that we can receive the items at, so the growers make one delivery, but we do very little local purchasing through a distributor or other sort of third party. It's direct from the producer.
All right. Okay, are you guys seeing the presentation again? I can't see anybody, so I'll assume so.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Once again, that is a short clip, sharing some tips, from a child nutrition director's perspective, that could be helpful for a producer. If you have a great child nutrition director in your area, in your state or your region, wherever you're doing a training, use them, have them come in and share some of those tips directly. That will be really impactful. Okay, so the first activity in this module, in this presentation, is for producers to take the opportunity to look at a menu, either the one there are some in the producer workbook, or if you have brought some local menus from schools, and give them a chance to really look at those menus and brainstorm what products could be local. So, if a school has salad bars, thinking about what all local products could be featured on a salad bar. Looking at the menu items, are there things that there is a good local substitute for? And so just really get producers thinking about how their items might fit. So take the menu item on page 27 of the producer workbook is this little worksheet, so they can write down the menu items and then maybe what their product could be, if they have a close substitution or something that would work. So section B of module 3 is about product development, and really thinking about how producers can alter their products if needed to meet school cooking or processing limitations, or to meet the needs of a school based on their cooking infrastructure or their storage capacity, or whatever it may be. So trainers will help producers understand the different types of processing, from a raw product, for example, raw carrots, to light processing such as carrot coins, to a high value added such as a parboiled product or a dried or frozen product. Another important point we want trainers to make in this section is that it can be really expensive to add processing infrastructure to a farm. So it might be a better option to connect with regional processing centers or other opportunities like that in your region or your state, or working with other buyers that might do processing themselves. So just being familiar with some of those processing options is a really good thing for you as facilitators, or having someone on your training team that knows that information. And then for those producers who are interested in investing in infrastructure, there are a couple of slides on financing and funding for farmers that are interested in retrofitting their operation to do some minimal processing on the farm. And then finally, the last section gets producers to start thinking about considering the cost of getting their farm product to the buyer. Once again, module 4 will go into that more in depth, but the cost of production and really determining if this market is a good fit for a producer or not, and if it meets their financial needs, is a really important point that we want to make sure producers have a good understanding of. So in this section, you will start off by reminding producers that school capacity will dictate the types of products and the level of processing required. Here is a good time to ask producers to think about the capacity discussion in section A and how this might affect processing. So, does a school do any processing themselves? Do they, do they take product and process it? Some schools I know, buy product in the summer and process it and freeze it and use it throughout the school. And other schools don't do that at all. So understanding that capacity is really important. Slides 19 and 20 discuss light processing, mainly of fruits and vegetables, and what that level of processing means exactly. And once again, through that initial meeting with a child nutrition director, producers can ask about the processing capacity and cooking infrastructure at schools. The next couple of slides discuss processing for meat and other high value added products, such as pre-cooked fruits and vegetables. And these products require extensive infrastructure and are probably best left to a processing kitchen and meat processor. This is, a note for those raising livestock and who are interested in selling meat to schools. Yesterday we heard Kent, I believe, and the producer, or I guess that was 2 days ago on Monday, when he shared about that he has a really good relationship with his processor, and he's able to get product that the school needs. This access to processing is an issue for livestock producers, and then in what form that they're able to do processing is another question. So here's a picture, for example, of having pre-made patties, hamburger patties. Not every processor is going to have that capacity. So it might just depend on the needs of the school and what a producer has access to as far as processing. So get them thinking about that. As trainers, it's going to be really helpful to be familiar with state or regional examples of value-added processing and also financing for these things. If you have worked with farmers at all, they're always going to ask about if there are grants available or how they can fund any particular activity. So if there are value-added processing, whether it be commercial kitchens that are available for rent, or university program centers. Here in Arkansas, we have a couple of great options. Extension has a new program where they are getting kitchens at our fairgrounds up to code and able to do value-added processing. So farmers have access to those facilities around the state. So that's one great example. The University of Arkansas also has a food innovation center where you can develop recipes and do your value-added processing, and farmers and food businesses can rent that space. So if there's something like that in your state, definitely be aware of it and be able to share that with your producers. And then producers are also going to have questions about processing rules and regulations. And once again, that's for the most part, state-based, and sometimes even more locally, down to your county health department or things like that, as far as food processing. So definitely be familiar with those particular regulations in your state and area. So once again, here is more talk about regional processing kitchens and other options for processing. And, this is another good time to look at farm to school grantees in your state. There are lots of examples of farm to school grantees who have used funds to do some sort of processing. So see if there's an example in your state or in your region you might be able to highlight. And it's also important to mention to producers that adding value is not just through processing, and have them start thinking about how their products add value beyond just processing. So we know that those local products, they're going to be super fresh, superior products. We know that because they're local, those farmers, they might be able to come in and do school programs, or their farms might be available for farm visits and field trips and things like that. So there's a lot of value that a local producer can bring beyond just, I'm able to process my carrots to sell them to the school. So get them thinking about that. We'll have an activity in a bit that that goes a little bit further on that. So I have another video clip I'm going to share with you, and this talks about the importance of timing and how schools and producers need to consider timing for, not only sales, but also processing. So I'm going to play this clip from Glenn Holmes.
Another advantage, sometimes a disadvantage that small farmers have, is that most of their products they produce, a lot of times they produce when school not in, or else the enrollment, as with summer schools, is very low. Networking is critical, and being able to talk to the food director and looking at and talk with them about buying what we call freshly frozen items. And if she can do it, locate you a local commercial freezer if possible. and try to develop a way to communicate between that commercial food freezer operation and the school. That way she know it is a certified facility that can hold frozen food. And that may be a way for you to be able to get more variety of product into that school system.
Okay, so once again, that was a short clip, and there are longer case studies with Mr. Holmes and sharing more thoughts. And but you know, his point of finding a commercial freezer or a facility to be able to hold product. Just another thing for producers to think about, and for you as facilitators and teachers of this curriculum to, you know, make sure that you're aware of what options are out there, and you know, things that other producers have used in the past. That will be really helpful as you are, you know, sharing with producers and helping them get started in farm to school sales. The next few slides walk producers through some of the costs to consider in doing even minimal processing. There's another producer spotlight that features meat processing, so you can share that if that will be relevant to your audience. And really, you can pick and choose which spotlight based on the producer audience. And then finally, slide 30 features a list of potential grant and low interest loan funds for investing in infrastructure and processing capacities on a producer's farm. And this list is also available for producers in the Digging Deeper section of their producer workbook. So that information is there. Once again, if you have ever worked with producers, you know that they're going to ask about the grants and the funding. So that's really important information. So there are a couple of other producer spotlights. Once again, pick the ones that are relevant to your audience and play all of them, whatever you feel is best. And you know, if you have local examples, if you have producers who could come in and talk, or you know of other local examples, use those. All right, so this activity, the values pitch, is an activity where you're going to ask producers to turn to their neighbor and give them a values pitch. So we want producers to say what sets their product apart from a wholesale distributor. And so, you know, when you're doing this, plan for about 10 minutes for this activity, and have producers give each other their values pitch and then maybe share out. So today, we are going to role play this. We're going to do some randomized matchups, and we want you to spend some time discussing values beyond processing that producers in your region might bring to a school buyer. So, Carlos, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Well, yeah, I'll stop sharing. Before I stop sharing and before we move you into groups, remember these things. You know, you're going to act like you're a producer, and some of the things that they might say, that how they bring value to a school or how their product is better than the rest. Okay. All right, Carlos, do your magic. All right. Is everybody back from the breakout rooms? Or are we still waiting for a few to come back?
We're still waiting for a few.
Okay. Everybody comes. All right, so what are some of the values that you guys shared? You can put them in the chat or come off mute. I wonder what you think producers will say, how they can bring value. Great, culturally relevant to school demographic population. Very good. I like that. Fresh product, harvested relatively recently. Absolutely. Those are great values. Organic certifications, yeah, organic or other certifications that a farmer might have. That absolutely can be a value and something that a school might not be able to get through their regular distributor. Very good. Anything else? Yes, absolutely. They can provide for activities too, not just 100% for the whole school district. Absolutely. So farm to school events or taste tests or things like that. Those are really great opportunities. Well, thank you. Thank you guys for doing that activity. And so that gives you a little bit of understanding, you know, when you would do this with producers and how to direct them and hear what they say. I bet you'll have some good innovative answers that producers come up with. Okay. Moving on. There we go. The next few slides in module 3 get producers thinking about pricing their products. And this is a really great time for producers to understand that there are many products that are a good fit for school purchases, but not every product is a good fit. So I'm really helping them, you know, realize that and helping them determine the products that are going to be the best fit. Really, products that have lower production costs are going to be a good fit for schools, just because we know that pricing point is often a barrier. And so products that have low production cost are going to be a good fit. And once again, thinking about those products and how they can fit into the school menu. You'll hear more about this in module 4. Andy's going to share about this and really helping producers understand their cost of production and determining, you know, what products would be a good fit. I do know the case study, the fuller video with Ali Marachek, she also talks about this and working with producers to help them, you know, determine what products would be a good fit, to help them, you know, meet their farm business goals and, you know, what they need for their income. Because once again, not every product is going to be a fit, and you know, not every product that a producer grows is going to be a good farm to school, you know, a good farm to school fit. The last activity in module 3 is modeled after the Washington Department of Agriculture's product planning chart, and you can find this on page 32 of the producer workbook. And this worksheet prompts producers to think about moving their product to the school. So identifying the product, identifying what need it meets for the school, you know, if there is any further processing that needs to happen. And really, you know, if a producer takes their product and kind of goes through this little flow chart, helps them think through the steps of what's needed to get their product into the school. Once again, at the end of the module here are some of the case studies that we've put together for farmers selling through channels described in this module. And these case studies are linked on the Bringing the Farm to School website. And then finally, there's the action planning check-in. And this is for trainers to review and ask these questions and have the producers reflect on these essential questions. So for module 3, these check-in questions are on page 55 of the Facilitator guide. And these check-in questions have producers identified the products or set of products that might work for school sales? Do these products need to be processed in any way? And if so, how is that going to happen? And then finally, ensure that producers understand how to find the tools to understand their cost of production, which will really be expanded upon in module 4. So, you know, after that reflection, be sure to leave some time for producers to determine their short-term goals to meet these gaps. And I've mentioned it many times throughout the presentation, but Module 3, there are lots of opportunities for regionalization and, to make this relevant to your state or your locality or the products that you're working with, the producers you're working with. So using those local menus, obviously using examples and pictures and capacities of schools in your own region. And also think about those farm to school grantees in your region and state to elevate any work that they have done that is relevant to these topics. And then any case studies that you may have, or like I mentioned, any child nutrition directors or producers who are doing this work and can share directly with producers, that is always the best option. So that is Module 3. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can see the rest of my screen and such. And if there's any questions. All right. Tomas, are you taking it back?
Yeah, sure. Thank
Okay.
you, Margot. And again, I'd like to just open it up. Does anyone have any questions for Margot? I know a lot of information was covered, but any thoughts on it or? Excellent. All right then. Well, for the remainder of our time before we break, we'll be going back to our breakout sessions. So Carlos, if you want to get that started, we're going to divide up into our state groups again and spend the rest of the time there. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully the state breakout group sessions went well. We're going to take a quick break and return back at 2 p.m. Central Time and 1 p.m. Mountain Time. And I'll just repeat that. We're going to take a quick break and come back at 2 p.m. Central Time, 1 p.m. Mountain Time. All right, welcome back, folks. Up next, we have coverage of Module 4, Getting to Know School Markets, with Andy Pressman of NCAT. So I'm going to hand it over to Andy to get started.
All right. Hello, everybody. And thank you, Tomas. And thank you for, I think it was Carlos with those wonderful tunes during the break. I'm really excited to be here with you all today. I'm coming to you live from New Hampshire, where, as Tomas mentioned, I'm part of the NCAT team. And just, I guess, as a side note, I'm actually looking at a break in the weather, a little bit of sunshine, which I haven't seen in about 2 weeks. And if we don't get another break here soon, we're expecting more rain starting tonight. But if we don't get a break, no one's going to be able to plant carrots for the students to come back to school with in the fall. Oh, but shoot. Anyway, but I'm really excited to be here with you today and to present on Module 4. And before we sort of dive in, I just want to thank you all for all the great work you do in supporting farm to school programs, particularly in respect to the local food chain and in bringing to the forefront shared values between the producers, schools, and the students. A lot of work has gone into this over the years, and you all continue to be a huge part of keeping the shared values a priority. And through my work with NCAT, I have the privilege of working with producers who sell to schools, and I have a big interest in working with producers to help them plan for scaling up to institutional and other intermediated markets. And my work also involves crop planning, particularly within diversified vegetable operations. And I have a passion for exploring and understanding the relationships between farm equipment and infrastructure and its current and future scales of production. So all this is part of the foundation of Module 4. And I just want to warn you all, it's a loaded module. All right, so starting off, Module 4 contains the business and production planning portion of this training. You can see the facilitator facing resources for Module 4 starting on page 79 of your facilitator guide, and the producer version on page 33 of the producer workbook. Module 4 focuses on whole farm business planning, considerations for scaling up for school markets, crop and livestock planning and production, and food safety considerations and regulations. As I mentioned, there are a lot of tools and resources identified in this module to help producers evaluate school markets and whether or not they're a good fit for their farms. With this in mind, it's important to consider your producer training team. If your team is strong on the procurement side, but not experienced on training producers on, say, business and financial management principles, you may need to pull in someone who is skilled at teaching these topic areas. And the same goes for food safety as well. All right, to see the full curriculum outline, you can turn to page 15 and 16 of your facilitator guide. As with all of the training modules, you can use the outline to get a quick glance at the core content and concepts for this module, learning objectives, and training activities to help producers reinforce the information. You can see in column 4 that this module is heavy on applied activities that include worksheets in the producer workbook and in familiarizing and utilizing several online resources that we're going to share with you. And the learning objectives for Module 4 are listed on your screen. We want farmers here to understand and assess their capacity for school sales. We want to further explore price point and return on investment, understand some of the infrastructure that might be required for certain school districts, and understand how to plan and move the produce from field to school. All right, so on your screen is a list of the core concepts included in this module, which are listed on page 80 of the facilitator guide. Core concepts align with the producer learning objectives and include business, financial, and production planning, as well as food safety, all through the filter of school sales. There are a lot of resources on production planning and enterprise analysis, so we encourage you to take a look at these and perhaps find state-specific resources if available. The resources that we have included are embedded links in Appendix A and here on page 80 of the facilitator guide. All right, so is everyone ready to dive into the module? Okay, we're going to start with section A, which is business planning for school sales. And this section is intended to help producers understand if selling to schools is a good choice for their farm business and their family and farm goals. It reviews the whole farm planning process of selling to schools that was presented on in the introduction. Selling to school markets require producers to be proactive in their planning and understanding their costs. If it doesn't look profitable on paper in the planning process, then it most likely won't be in reality. So we'll be reviewing a few tools to assist producers in this decision-making process throughout this section. And so this slide is just a review and another prompt for producers to review the channels they are considering for school sales and to gauge if their goals still align with this based on what they've learned so far in the training. All right, and looking at slides 6 through 9 here, they include a discussion on business planning and financial tools for producers. So here we want to help producers understand how to calculate break-even price for their product and their return on investment for accessing school markets, especially if changes to infrastructure will be needed. There are numerous models and software programs available for producers, many of which are identified in the workbooks and online, and many producers will have an idea, but this will give producers an opportunity to develop a clear understanding of production costs, their break-even price point, and the time frame of their return on investment when selling to schools. This information can also be used in creating cash flow statements, which are really critical for farms to align their monthly expenses and gross sales with the school year or a school's payment terms. And these slides in the corresponding producer workbook on page 35 also include a series of resources to help make these calculations. So now we have a producer spotlight, one of our case studies, and this is with Katrina Becker from Cattail Organics, located in Wisconsin. And this is an excerpt from a podcast, and I just want to say that it's not the greatest audio quality, but Kat has some really great insight into price point in this excerpt that we really wanted to make sure to include. So Kat mentions in this podcast that they first considered trying to compete with distributors on their pricing, but the farm doesn't do that anymore. And so Kat explains that a lot of it's based on good record keeping on costs of production and profitability of each crop grown on the farm. So the farm prices would be considered high by wholesale standards, but Kat mentions that the food service directors that she works with are happy to pay more because there's little waste. Lettuce is a good example of this. And in the podcast, she talks about baby lettuce mix, which she sells at $7 a pound, but virtually none of the product is thrown away. The food service director that she works with says that they can expect to throw away anywhere from 1/3 to 2/3 of the product from a distributor. So Kat suggests that this is something to consider when trying to distinguish a farm's product from products that the food service director currently purchases from a distributor. So then we move into an applied activity, worksheet 4A. And here we want producers to spend about 15 minutes on this activity. And producers can work in groups with similar enterprises to use the tools linked in the presentation in order to help find their cost of production and break-even price for specific enterprises. If producers are already looking to target one specific product on their farm, then they may choose or wish to work individually, and that's okay. But overall, I just want to stress the importance of peer-to-peer learning and the opportunity here to work together to focus on similar enterprises. And so this is how the worksheet looks in the producer workbook on page 36. And we're starting here to dive into things like fixed and variable costs. So if any producer seems overwhelmed, it may be good to remind them that developing an enterprise or crop or livestock budget can be challenging and may take several years to develop, especially with multiple enterprises or crops. This is why record keeping is so critical. Also, in regards to planning costs, there are always unexpected costs that usually don't find their way into a budget. And so I just want to mention how important it is to think about these unexpected costs and sort of try and cover them as best we can. One way to do this is in an overall operating budget to include something called a contingency line item, which basically adds a percentage to the overall operating costs. And 20% is often used in sort of these cases. Another way to do this is to take a percentage of a purchasing price of a piece of equipment or infrastructure and adding that onto yearly operating expenses. So for example, if I'm looking to buy a $20,000 greenhouse this year, I may take 10% of that purchasing price, $2,000, and add it to my overall yearly operating cost to cover things like my annual heating maintenance, anything I have to do to update or change with glazing, things like that. But these are costs that we just tend not to think about when we purchase some piece of equipment or infrastructure. But as we know, things break and always happen, especially when we need to use them. And we should account for these in our operating budgets. All right, so that's section A. And now we're going to move on to section B. And I just want to mention that section B starts to focus on scaling up production, and C and D sort of move into crop and livestock planning, but all these together can really be separated out into a separate training depending on the audience. So starting off with slides 13 and 14, here we discuss how different market channels will affect the scale needed to meet the demand of the market, and how important it is to ensure the farm is solid in its production skills before scaling up to sell to schools. One way to do this is by evaluating the weakest link that is preventing the farm from succeeding or managing towards its goals. This is an opportunity to do a deep dive into a root of a problem, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in the applied activity coming up here. All right, the next few slides on scaling up will help producers understand some of the factors that can lead to success, or on the opposite end, some heartburn when scaling up to sell to schools. Certainly, labor is an important consideration and one of the biggest expenses for a farm business. So you may want to spend a little extra time on this and consider adding an extra slide or two with your state labor laws. I'd also like to add that as educators and technical service providers, we like to stress that a farm or any business should be profitable where they are currently at before considering scaling up. However, in my experience, I find that most farmers scale up in order to manage towards profitability. Also note that on slide 16, there are 4 common components listed for scaling up that define it, not just in terms of increased acreage, but perhaps herd size, number of crop enterprises, number of markets. And one that's not listed there is just being more efficient and better within current farm systems that will in turn increase yields and increase profitability. I don't want to go back a slide, but there's if anyone has any comments as to the hand gestures I'm making on slide 15, feel free to put those in the chat. Oh, thanks, Tammy. Tammy's controlling the slides there and moving back. All right, but on slides 18 through 20, here we're focusing on school-specific considerations for scaling up, including school requirements of consistency and grading, packaging, and labeling. These considerations are so important for successful relationships in farm to school, while also stressing the importance of clear communications between all parties that may require certain systems be in place for communicating these aspects. Not to be negative, but all of this needs to be addressed and considered together for things like traceability and in the unfortunate situation of a possible recall on a product. All right, in slides 21 through 22, we're going to focus on risk management and the risk of scaling up, including managing federal food safety requirements if the farmers move beyond the exemptions and school liability insurance requirements. I would add that risk management should be included in a farm's business plan, which is a proactive approach when certain issues arise. And just looking here on slide 22, we have an ATRA publication that's been updated to reflect some of the new federal crop insurance programs that now incorporate several enterprises under one policy, as well as now including a premium price for things like organic certified products. And as we wrap up this section, it's important to remind producers that scaling up requires careful cost calculations to understand the rate of return and to see if it actually pencils out. It may be valuable to have a conversation about scaling up for multiple wholesale or intermediary market channels, not just for school sales. And there are also several wonderful trainings out there that you can also incorporate into these trainings, such as Atina Diffley's Wholesale Success, that could support this section. And if you're not familiar with at least the manual Wholesale Success, I highly recommend it. It definitely is one to have on your bookshelf and as a great reference, and it's available at familyfarmed.org. All right, as I mentioned earlier, the sort of weak link component, and so the applied activity for this section is on page 39 of the producer workbook. And the goal here is for a producer to identify the one and only one weak link on their farm that is holding them back in their current or future production for school sales. Everything else that is identified by the producer are considered adverse factors. And while they're important, they're still able to allow the producer to produce and manage their production while still selling to school markets. This is also an opportunity to stress the importance for producers to monitor their decisions and progress throughout the growing season. And this is very related to their scale of production and their ability to do this, but it can allow for quick in-season adjustments that may be needed so as to not jeopardize the contract a producer has with a school. Think about how producers you may know who had school contracts at the start of COVID and how they had to adapt once schools started shutting down. All right. Now it's like taking from a fire hose here, but now we're moving into section C and D, and section C focuses on crop production planning. And depending on your audience, this section may be used or not, depending if it's a livestock group or a crop group, or if it's a little bit of both. You can consider breaking out by enterprise type. So starting off, we have a producer spotlight featuring a small farm in rural Montana that is selling with a small rural school district. And their school sales are just one of their marketing channels. But in this spotlight, the Van Orders of Living Root Farm talk about succession planning as a tool to make sure the dollars and cents line up to meet their obligations. And in slides 27 through 29, we're now digging into how to use school contracts and agreements to develop a crop plan. And as with enterprise or financial planning, production planning is critical in meeting the needs of school markets. It involves first understanding the needs of the school and then working backwards all the way through the production process in order to figure out the what, when, where, and how the producer will meet the needs of the school. For example, on my family's farm, we start with the delivery or market date and then work backwards to figure out when to harvest, how long a crop is in the field for, when it is seeded or transplanted in the field, where it will be planted in the field, when it is started in the greenhouse, and how much seed I need to start and or buy. As mentioned earlier in this module, if it doesn't work on paper pre-season, then chances are it won't work in the field. That is to say, it pays to plan. Keep in mind that planning helps manage risks, and crop growers need to plan for things like crop loss, while livestock producers may have challenges associated with processing dates and the impacts this can have on animal weights. So now we're going to start to look at a few of the crop planning tools that we refer to. One of them here is called Ag Decision Maker, and this was developed by Craig Chase at Iowa State University Extension. This tool is designed for producers to evaluate marketing outlets using whole farm records. And whole farm records are the types of records a farmer needs to keep on file for their income taxes, or Schedule F. And they can be used to evaluate various marketing outlets, especially when a producer doesn't have detailed crop or enterprise records. So producers can use this spreadsheet to evaluate different market outlets based on their potential contribution to overall farm net income. So I haven't used that spreadsheet often, but some I'm much more familiar with are from Johnny Selected Seeds up in Maine. They have a growers library on their website. And under that, they have a great section called Planning Tools and Calculators. And here they include calculators for things like seed starting and transplanting dates, succession planning, and harvest dates. And keep in mind that harvest dates are the starting point for crop planning, and then we're working backwards to planting and seed starting. So Tammy's going to bring up the calculator. There's a couple things we want to point out. All right, so there's the list of calculators, and we're going to succession planting, which is a Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so as this uploads here, we chose this one to showcase because, as I mentioned within the case study with Living Root Farm, succession planning or having a consistent supply is so critical for selling to schools. And there are sort of two ways crop producers do successions, either through staggering the planting dates of the same variety of a crop, or by using a different variety of the same crop but has a different maturity date. So for example, Ace red peppers take 70 days to mature, while the variety Olympus takes 85 days. Peppers may not be the greatest example, but I think you get the point of sort of the two ways we can manage these successions, whether using the same variety or a different variety of the same crop. But I want to point out here on the spreadsheet, line 30, I don't know if you can see that, but it shows that there's this component for incorporating a farm's first frost date and the impact it can have on column M of the spreadsheet, which is the final planting date. So without considering frost dates, the spreadsheet may determine values or dates that are past the frost date of a specific area and when a farmer may not be able to plant by. So without putting that in, could give you a false number. And I'm not sure how important this is for your region, but at least where I'm at, everything we do is by, is by frost dates. But I just want to mention that that changes the values of column M and possibly even some previous ones, just depending on when a frost date is for your area. All right, thanks, Tammy. And we can go back to the slides here. All right, thanks, Tammy. So now we're at the applied activity for this section, and it's based on crop planning, and it starts with a bid sheet exercise that is then can be used to complete a crop plan for one crop. So it gives an example of using carrots that starts with the production goal, which would be based off of the quantity a school needs for the product, and then shows the process of working backwards, as I mentioned, to figure out how much to plant and how much space is required in the field. So that is section B, a loaded section on crop planning. Section D of module 4 focuses on animal protein and livestock planning. And this section starts with an applied activity with livestock producers considering how their products fit onto the school plate. This activity is simply a gauge of the room and to hear from producers about their experiences and what products work best for school sales. So in this section, producers will focus on school menus and try to determine portion sizes for their protein products, with the key concept focusing on versatility and costs. And as Margot discussed in module 3, a school's capacity and needs will dictate how much and in what form the livestock product will take. For example, does the school have freezer storage? Then we want producers to think about production planning and have you folks share some tools for determining production capacity and profitability. Also keep in mind, as Kent from Augustus Ranch mentioned on the panel on Monday, that it's very important to have several months to a year's advance notice of the quantity required to sell to schools. So this is critical for scheduling processing dates, which are set far in advance, as he talked about. So one toolbox we want to showcase here is called Compass Toolbox, which is developed at the Center for Integrated Agriculture Systems at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. John Hendrickson, I believe, led this project. And there are 3 tools in this toolbox. One is for vegetable production, one is for livestock, and one is for organic grains. And these tools help farmers actively manage for increased farm profits by helping them understand their costs of production by product and by market channel. So this enables farmers to make strategic decisions based on data rather than instinct or personal preference. And the final slide in this section, slide 38, touches on egg production. This is a topic you may want to expand on depending upon the interests of the producer audience. This is also a really great opportunity to consider using examples of local eggs in schools that you can elevate from your state. And then we have a second applied activity to round out this section. And it's very similar to the crop production planning activity, but using beef as an example, where it starts with total amounts needed and then is broken down to pounds per week, number of weeks, and the total number of animals needed to meet the supply. All right. And so now we are going to dive into the food safety section, section E of module 4. And food safety and a producer's inability to meet school food safety requirements was identified as a top barrier in the needs assessment that Carolyn talked about on Monday. So we want to start this section off with a forthcoming myth-busting video and written case study to help illustrate that schools don't have an obligation to follow standards that are greater than state or federal requirements. So there is frequently, I would say, confusion around the different types of food safety standards and certifications on the part of producers and buyers. And so we focus on the obvious differences between produce safety and meat processing safety. For example, there is FSMA and GAPS, which we'll talk about here in a moment, which are related to produce safety, versus HACCP, which is related to meat and food processing. And so the food safety section kicks off with a little bit of myth busting from our friend Erica Rincon at Common Ground Farm in New York. And Erica talks about how the farm works with the school district in their county to come to an understanding on food safety standards. And Tammy's going to play a clip here of what Erica has to say about food safety.
States and different school districts have different food safety requirements depending on their own set of. We're lucky that in our school district, the Beacon City School District, that they don't require GAP certification. In lieu of that, our food service director was able to come and do a site visit where she worked through a checklist of food safety guidelines and made recommendations based on that to ensure that we had good general practices. Some of the things that she asked was that we exclude animals from our field, which we do with our metal deer fence, and also from our pack shed that has a roof over it. She also asked that we use an organic disinfectant in our wash water and that we stop using wet burlap to cover our crops in the walk-in cooler. So we switched to plastic. We do still use wet burlap on some of our other products that aren't going to the schools because we want to limit our plastic use. But in general, the recommendations that she made improved our overall practices anyway, and it was really good relationship building with her to ensure that there was trust between the food service director and the farmers.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Okay, so after producers listen to the video about Common Ground Farm, or possibly a state or a regional farm that you wish to share about, facilitators can talk about some of the common food safety requirements. And as a reminder, the school food authority may not have a specified requirement and may lean on the federal and state food safety requirements. Every school is different, but you already know that. So it's important. A couple things I just want to point out here. One, schools that set specific food safety requirements or vendor qualifications, these should be addressed in the solicitations. I would also remind producers to review any state-specific food safety standards and to be familiar with the federal standards. And finally, this might be a good time to plug the direct-to-school sales, as distributors may require GAP certification. So let's take a minute to focus on this and some of the other acronyms. All right, so for purposes of this training, it would be good to share some of the commonly used acronyms and what they mean for producers that want to sell to schools. If producers understand the differences in these certifications and regulatory programs, it will help them better communicate with school buyers. Thus, this section also touches on the different standards and certifications. These include the federal standard, which is administered by the Food and Drug Administration, not the USDA. And what I'm referring to here is known as FSMA, or the Food Safety Modernization Act. And this is mandatory unless you meet one of the exemptions, which are covered in the workbooks. Another one is Good Agricultural Practices, or GAPS, which is a voluntary produce safety certification that is verified through an independent auditor. A GAP audit is often required for selling to broadline or some regional distributors. And you may also be aware of Group Gap, which is a USDA farm food safety program that allows farmers, food hubs, and other marketing organizations of all sizes to band together and pool resources to achieve GAP certification. So in other words, Group Gap is, according to the website, USDA website, helping more farmers supply fresh local produce to institutional markets and providing buyers and consumers alike with more purchasing and product options. We also suggest mentioning HACCP, or Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point, which is a procedural system for food processors, including meat, to follow to ensure procedures are in place to avoid getting people sick. There are certifications and trainings for HACCP, and most folks that are outlining a HACCP plan are required to be federally or state inspected, and a HACCP plan helps prevent violations. And as the Common Market folks referred to on Monday, they have a HACCP plan in place because they sell meat products. Okay, and the next slide, slide 46, is on meat and food safety. And again, this can be omitted if you're training mainly crop producers. The same goes for slides 30 through 32. But most meat producers take their product to a state or USDA processor. So here I would highlight the ATRA publication titled Working with Your Meat Processor. And this publication provides communication tools to get the cuts of meat that a school might be interested in. And we understand how in-depth food safety trainings can be. So I would suggest that you refer producers to the amazing resources that most states have to get familiar with state-based resources. Many of you have extension offices on your team and Produce Safety Alliance certified trainers, which is really great. But if not, consider engaging them to talk about state-based training programs. If those resources are not available in your state, NCAT's ATRA program, for example, has a page on our website that includes a tutorial, videos, podcasts, and other tools to help producers understand food safety and how to write a food safety plan. And another great school-based food safety resource in both the producer and facilitator digging deeper sections is the Oklahoma Farm to School Food Safety page. If you follow the link in the chat function, you'll be able to see there are lots of resources for producers here. And I would like to give a shout out to Sherry Long from the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, who was instrumental in creating this library of resources. Sherry is part of this training, and I believe she has made it here. And I just want to take a moment, Sherry, if you are here, if there's anything you'd like to point out or mention about this tool. All right, well, maybe Sherry, if there's anything that comes to mind, you can, if you're able to put anything in the chat, that would be great, but this is just a really excellent resource.
Can you guys hear me? This is Sherry.
We can.
Oh, awesome. So I'm now driving again. So tell me what you want to know.
Well, we just have the link in the web page up on the screen, but if there's anything you want to point out about the resources that are included or how best to use this resource, that would be great.
Okay, well, just glancing at what you have pulled up on the slide, some of those resources, I'm not sure when these were pulled off the website because some of those things are obsolete. But if you go to okfarmtoschool.com, you can pull up like my farm to school, the current farm to school handbook, the one that's here. What is that? Like I said, I'm driving. What is in that left-hand corner that's got the red, the green, the yellow, and all that on it? What does that say? Anybody?
It says tips, tools, and guidelines for food distribution and food safety.
Okay, that's most of that is current, so you can use those resources. My food safety guys at the Department of Ag have sent me just within the last week or so some updated food safety procedures that are now in place that follow USDA as well as the state. And so I'm not in charge of my website. I have to send that off. And so I haven't had an opportunity to get that done yet, but yes, those resources on there, yes, please feel free to get on there and borrow and use as much as you need to.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sherry.
And if there's any other questions that you have, feel free to email me. I think I think we all have access to our emails. But it's sherry.long@ag.ok.gov. I know I said that really fast, but Tammy can probably put it in the chat since I'm driving.
We'll put it in the chat, Sherry.
Okay. Thanks. I'm sorry.
All right. Thank you, Sherry.
You're welcome.
Okay, so going back to the slides. We are now on the applied activity 4E, which is the Farm Food Safety Assessment. And this activity is related to the section as sort of the risk assessment component. And so the assessment questions pretty much a way to frame the outline of a food safety plan. So you may suggest that producers share the mitigation strategy outlined in this assessment with school buyers. And so I want to note that this is a fillable PDF online, and it can be printed off to show school buyers their food safety risk mitigation strategy. This is mainly for crop producers, as livestock producers typically work with their meat processor to ensure food safety protocols are met. And as I mentioned just a few slides ago, the ATRA publication, Working with Your Meat Processor, is a great tool to refer your protein producers to. So that is it for what I'd like to cover on business, production, and food safety planning for Module 4. As with the other modules, trainers will prompt producers to use these assessment questions on page 66 to help frame their next steps and short-term goals in their action plan. The essential questions we want producers to have a basic understanding of after this module are having a basic understanding of their break-even price or costs of production for the products they intend to sell to schools, what the weak link on the farm might be that is preventing them from scaling up or being successful for school sales, understanding what resources to access to develop a production plan, working backwards from the school solicitation, and finally, understanding food safety and how to communicate with buyers about their food safety practices. And here is a glimpse of the case studies that we feature for the module and who spoke well to meeting a price point that works with schools, and some of the decision-making processes the farmers went through for scaling up for school sales. And finishing out this module, since many of these principles are general to all producers, there are not a lot of regionalization prompts in the facilitator guide. So we suggest that regionalization through producer profiles and to focus on examples of the types of enterprises that are unique to your region and your audience to highlight at your trainings. So on that note, like I mentioned, there's a lot of information in Module 4. And yeah, it's like I said, it can be sort of extracted for its own separate training, but fits really well with Module 2 and 3 from Robert and Margot as well, as we sort of build on what they've talked about previously. So thank you all so much, and happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Andy. Thank you so much for going through all that. And again, if you have any questions for Andy or any other presenters today, feel free to reach out to us individually, or you can chime in later on the day when we open up for Q&A. At this point, we're going to take a more extended break, about 15 minutes, putting us back here at 3 p.m. Central Time. So take another 15-minute break, and then we'll jump back in to talk about the conclusion and planning and action from Jenny Lee. All right, see you all then.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. So we're going to dig into the last bit of the curriculum, so the conclusion. All right, so the conclusion is really dedicated to supporting producers as they finish their action plans, and provide that opportunity to answer any additional questions that they may have, and then to conduct those post-training evaluations. So the timing on this section just really depends on how much extra time and support producers need in finalizing their action plans. So if we turn to page 101 in the facilitator guide, getting to the end there, as well as page 51 in the producer workbook, and you can see those screenshots there on the screen being shared. So like all the other modules, this page in the facilitator guide includes the brief overview of the conclusion, that outline or map of the conclusion, and then that background information to support trainers as they are preparing for the conclusion. So the core concepts and those digging deeper resources, as well as the link to download the editable slide deck file. And then the producer workbook, if you can take a glance at it, is pretty short. It's essentially just prompting producers to review their action planning guide and their end of module check-ins and work on their action plan. And then, as you can see, they also have access to download a PDF version of the PowerPoint, the slide deck file. So on the next slide, we have the curriculum outline, and really the conclusion includes three main sections. So just that overview, an action planning section, and then the section for the post-training evaluations. And we really estimate that the conclusion will take anywhere from 45 to 60 minutes, depending on how much time that producers really need to spend on finishing their action plans and any questions that they may have. So there's flexibility certainly in that timing there. All right, so if we can jump into the slides, we'll go ahead and turn to page 102 of the facilitator guide, looking at slides 2 and 3. So the main objective of the conclusion, again, is for producers to work on their action planning, to get support with it, to share it with other producers that are participating, and kind of do those wrap-up steps. And, you know, again, this has been a thread throughout the entire training, but this is really where we're supporting producers to pull all of those pieces together, so that they feel really confident leaving the training with a plan. And if you look at the next two slides, slide 4 and 5, these slides provide that opportunity for you to talk about the goals of the conclusion. And this is also a good time to recap the key takeaways and content that they've learned throughout the training. And there are those talking points on page 102, you'll see next to slide 5 that summarize each module, but this should really be adapted and reflect what you actually covered in your training. So a recap and overview to start in the conclusion there. And then moving on to sort of that section A, which is at the top of page 102 in the facilitator guide, and that dives into the action planning. So you'll see on the next slide those screenshots of slides 7 and 8 in the facilitator guide. This is just sort of prompting producers to revisit their action plan. And again, depending on the size of the group, and that will depend on how much time you really need. But this is also time for small group and whole group sharing. Once producers have filled out some of their action plans, giving them that opportunity to share with each other and learn from each other, and see what other folks are leaving the training with. And so we just really encourage you to feel comfortable in building as much time that's needed here, so that producers can really have that informal kind of peer learning opportunity together as they're wrapping up their plans. And then, as I mentioned yesterday, I believe, the tying it all together table. So that's the sort of the last piece of the action planning table. So let's just take a second to turn there. And that's actually it's referenced on slide 9 of the facilitator guide, but the actual table is on page 61 of the producer workbook. So we can turn there and look at that. And again, that's the last page of the school business action planning guide in the producer workbook. So this table is essentially a template that's intended for producers to pull all of the components of the action plan and learnings from the training into one spot. And so you'll see the table includes a column for producers to first identify which market channel, so local school, food hub, or distributor, that they're most interested in pursuing or expanding into following this training. There is that option of, producers deciding that this isn't the right option for them right now, and that's an okay conclusion as well. But this is set up for those 3 options to be chosen there. And it's good to emphasize that choosing one doesn't preclude working with the others, but just want to encourage producers to focus on one just for the purposes of thinking through this table. And then you'll see the next column there includes the values pitch. So what Margot facilitated us going through earlier today, what makes their product different or unique, why should schools be interested in purchasing from them? And again, that pitch is going to vary depending on the market channel that they choose, but those sort of core values of what they can offer should stay the same. And then the following the columns after that really ask producers to identify those key resources, next steps, and key products and partners that are needed to move forward with school sales via the market channel that they've identified that they want to focus on. And so again, ideally at this point, those resources and partners and next steps have more or less been identified already in their action plan table. But if there are still missing gaps and producers are having trouble identifying their market or sort of what those next steps are, you as trainers should really encourage them to revisit and review those relevant content areas from the training, or provide that additional support to help them identify contacts in their state or region that can further support them as they're developing their plan moving forward. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time here because we do have a great deep dive into how to support trainers in using action plan. We have a video that is accessible on our website where we go through an example of the action plan table and the tying it together table. And we also hear from 2 farms, so Fiery Ginger Farm in California and Rolling Branch Farms in Georgia, about how they use both informal and formal sort of goal setting and action planning to sell to schools. So that's a great resource to check out. Tammy just dropped the link in the chat to get some more support on action planning with producers. All right, so you can see on the next slide, this is really the last activity that we have in the training, in the conclusion. And this is really just intended to be an activity that celebrates the end of the training, but also can sort of facilitate that accountability and motivation to support producers in following through with their action plans as needed. So the suggested activity here is for producers to send themselves a postcard that won't arrive until a year later. So essentially, producers are asked to address a postcard to themselves with their goal or vision for where they see themselves in a year related to their farm to school goals. And as trainers, the idea is that you'll collect them and mail them at a later date. And again, time permitting, this is an opportunity where producers can share their postcard or their goal or their vision with the whole group or small groups as they feel comfortable. And again, this activity will take about 10 to 15 minutes from start to finish. And those instructions on how to facilitate this activity are on the at the bottom of page 103, slide 10. And if folks are looking, you'll notice that that slide thumbnail image is not is incorrect if you're looking for it, but it is slide 10 there. The talking points and instructions are correct there. And again, this is just a suggestion. If you have other closing activities that you've used before in trainings, or other ways that you've stayed connected with training participants after the training, feel free to plug those in there as well. And the very last component of the conclusion, as I mentioned yesterday, is the post-training evaluation. So just note that there are 2 post-training evaluations. So one that occurs at the end of your training, immediately at the end of your training, and then the second that occurs about 6 to 12 months after the training. And so the post-training survey link is listed here on slide 12 on page 104 of the facilitator guide. And it's also in that evaluation protocol guidance document that we've adapted for virtual settings that's in your workshop materials folder. And so, yes, as I mentioned yesterday, further guidance on the evaluation process will be provided tomorrow. So any questions, thoughts about that, hold those for tomorrow, and we'll make sure those get answered. But just note again that this is where you're sort of prompted and cued to do that post-training survey at the end of your training. So that is a wrap on the curriculum. Hopefully the last 2 days have really given you a good sense of what the curriculum content contains, and helping you feel more prepared to begin adapting the content for your producer audiences. But yeah, I will pause and answer any questions that may have come up about the conclusion, or otherwise provide that opportunity for folks to ask questions or share comments or thoughts. We're in the home stretch. All right, well, we're about to go into our second and last breakout for the day. So if you do have any questions that come up, your facilitators will be able to help you with that. And I'm going to pass to Lacey for her to sort of frame that breakout and what we'll be talking about together. And yeah, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Jenny Lee, and thanks to all of you for hanging in for day 3. That is the curriculum. You've seen it all. We know that it's a ton to digest, but we hope that you walk away with at least a broad idea of the content and how this might help support farm to school work and support producers in your state. So we certainly don't expect you to have this all memorized or integrated or know everything yet, but we hope that you've gotten a good feel for the kind of the overall content and how it'll work for you. So going into our next breakout, again, this is an opportunity for you to be kind of synthesizing all of that information. So we are going to be working with Jamboard 13 if you all have not done this in your group yet. And again, we know that groups might be moving at different paces. So if this doesn't align with where you are in your group, your facilitator will guide you effortlessly. But most groups are probably still working on that slide, Jamboard 13, looking at training opportunities in your state. So what are the existing producer training opportunities that this might work and integrate into? And then what are other opportunities? Where are other events? Where might be an opportunity to hold an event where this training would be a good fit? And then we're going to go into more of that action planning, coming back to your trainer action plan to talk about knowing your content. So now that you've seen kind of that overview of all of the content, this is an opportunity for you to think about what would it take to get you to that point of being ready to implement this training, feeling confident in knowing the content and feeling confident that it is adapted and works for your state. So what would those steps look like? In that conversation, it's also a great opportunity, maybe if questions come up, to ask your facilitator or to make note of some of those questions for when we come back to the group. Is there a little bit of content that's a little bit fuzzy, or is there an area that you would want us to recap a little bit? So as you're kind of processing that knowing your content question, we can harness some of those questions to either address in your small groups or back in the large group as well. And another great opportunity kind of in that conversation around know your content is to be thinking about what kind of support you would need. As we've mentioned, NCAT and NFSN will be providing technical assistance going forward. And so that's a helpful time for you to think about what support you would need and also be able to share that back with us about how we can further support you once we leave this training this week. So that is your task for the next 25 minutes in those small groups. So I think, Carlos, we are ready to break out.
All right, folks, welcome back. Hopefully that last breakout session went well. we are at the end of day 3 today, and I'd like to just open it back up to you all and ask if you have any unanswered questions or any questions that you may have for the presenters today or the last 3 days, or perhaps maybe even questions for other state teams. So yeah, feel free to share your questions, thoughts, comments in the chat box, or unmute yourself. And then additionally, if you have maybe any information to share or any progress to share at this point that you've discussed within your state team, for instance, if you may already have a host site considered for the local producer trainings, feel free to share those bits of news. And yeah, I'll turn it over to you all.
Hello, I'm Shannon from Arkansas. I thought that I would start us off. So in our breakout, we were talking about like opportunities for different producer trainings. And we had the Arkansas Women in Ag Conference. We had UADA produce safety trainings and NCAT farm trainings. And then for like new sites or new opportunities for this training, one that was brought up was the Arkansas Oklahoma Horticulture Industry Show. And that's actually going to be hosted in Arkansas this year. So there was a lot of interest in our team about going and just kind of gauging interest in getting to meet new farmers that maybe we haven't gotten to meet before. And also collaborating with Extension. That was one of our big partners that we had talked about collaborating with, and also utilizing their research stations as potential sites for the trainings. And then we also talked a little bit about our timeline, just that we would start having a really serious discussion about it like this fall, and then hold kind of gauge interest this spring, and also hold strategy sessions this spring as well. Of course, those are always subject to change. Thank you.
So good to know. Thanks for sharing, Shannon. Any others would like to share what their state teams developed so far? All right, then. Well, we made it through day 3. One more day left. I'm gonna leave you with that and hope to see you all tomorrow for day 4. Take care. Thank you.